Live from the Washington, D.C. area, all empowered citizens need to know about intelligent use of resources, smart governance, inclusive communities, smart industry, and healthy, thriving urbanization. This is Smart Sustainability, the TV talk about shaping a sustainable future in the digital age with Nicolette DeVidar. Welcome on Smart Sustainability, the show with a wholesome approach on what's ahead. Costa Rica had an earthquake today of magnitude 6.2, a region that in the last 100 years only had 5 major earthquakes. Helene death toll tops 250 as of today, with recovery efforts still going on, looking for missing people inside cars, damaged homes, and where debris has gathered downstream. Now, 123 of the Helene death tolls occurred in North Carolina, a region that was particularly hit hard. Fact is, we're being confronted with many more violent weather outputs, such as floodings, volcanoes, eruptions, landslides, fires, and so much more than we're used to. While reasons are many, and that's not what we want to discuss today, I want to discuss something much more pragmatic this evening, namely, how can you prepare for Earth's rumblings, violent weather, and other eruptions? What should you have at home as emergency kit? Do we need to be ready with go-to bags or something similar? What do you do when suddenly your phone sends off the ominous alarm that we've all heard in the middle of the night? And how do you know whether your city, your neighborhood, your county is prepared? Joining me today is Walter English. He's the Deputy Emergency Coordinator and Head of Planning for the City of Fairfax. Walter, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, no, thanks for having me.
And also a member of, as I learned, the International Association of Emergency Management, correct? Yes. So for those of you out there, if you don't know that this actually exists, yes, there is an association for emergency management. And I presume you have also a lot of rules and codes to adhere to as a member there, right?
Oh, yes, most definitely. Between that one and the state association, it gives you codes of ethics, things that you follow. It just kind of gives you direction, just like any other professional field would have.
Yeah. Okay, let's dive right in. First question, hypothetically, let's say it's in the middle of the night and suddenly your phone goes off. I think most of us actually have all experienced that. And so suddenly you get this ominous buzzer and it says tornado alarm or something else. What do I do?
Well, first, you should already have a plan. Be prepared. Have it. If it's a tornado, you want to get to a safe place, an interior room with no windows, a low level. If not, perhaps in the bathroom, in the bathtub, and cover yourself. It's really about being safe and then going to a place that's going to be away from windows. So depending on what the threat might be, whether it's an earthquake or a tornado, there's different actions that you should take. But the real key is you should just always be prepared for whatever it might be.
Now, I presume are there actually different alarm types for different things? So does an earthquake have a different alarm than the tornado has?
Well, if it's going off on your phone, so you can get local messages. So if you, whatever county or city or town you might live in, a lot of them have alert systems that they can alert you. A lot of times when it goes off on your phone or your TV, it could be sent out by the National Weather Service, and that is imminent. So it could say there's a tornado in your area, seek shelter. Or it could say, you know, a severe thunderstorm watch, seek shelter. So a lot of those messages will give you an action. They're not just telling you something, they're also giving you an action to follow.
Yeah, but here's the problem though. So I'm sure I'm not alone. A lot of other people that I actually spoke to have very similar issues. And I think for you at home, that's probably the same thing. So we hear so much on the news about weather and the tornado and how bad it's going to be, etc. And there has been very often a little bit too much of here comes the wolf cry so that nothing happens. And people have lost trust in these things. So when this thing suddenly goes off at night, and I remember actually not so long ago when we had a tornado alarm here, there were many people in my neighborhood that were at first like, so what are we going to do? So most of them actually went back to sleep, thinking that because it's such a big county, Fairfax County is a big area, for example, that you looked it up and it's like, oh, it's not anywhere near my street, and then you go back to you go back to sleep or something. What is actually the best way as a resident, as a citizen, to figure out if this is imminent in your street where you're at, or whether this is sort of some other places in the county?
Right. So if your phone's going off, it's normally imminent. A lot of times the Weather Service will do it by areas or zip code. They will not do like a whole area. So even though Fairfax County is very, very large, the west side of the county could have different weather than the east side. So a lot of times if you get that as alert, it's for that particular area. And sometimes they will tell you. So recently there was one that came through from the south through the north, through Prince William and the Mount Vernon area.
Correct.
And it said, you know, if you're in this zip code, seek shelter now. If you're in this area. So it gave an area if you were in Mount Vernon or Alexandria. So even if you got that message, if you lived in Oakton, you're like, okay, that's Alexandria, it doesn't pertain to me. But most often if your phone goes off, it's for the area that you're in. A lot of times tornadoes, they can go up and down, they can touch down, they can go back up, they're unpredictable. So a lot of times it's better to get that alert for the most people so more people can be safe.
So how many minutes do we plan in normally? So imminent, so when the alarm goes off, how many minutes from a planning purpose do you usually have for, and I don't mean this, I mean, I know it can be imminent, but as a nutshell, so if I hear the alarm, how many minutes do I roughly have?
So that question does not have an answer because storms move at different speeds. So we can sit here and say, it could be 2 minutes, but if this storm is moving super, super fast, then that 2 minutes could be 30 seconds. As we've seen recently with Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene, they were both moving at different rates. So it's the same thing when we have a severe thunderstorm or a tornado. Storms move at different speeds, so it's really hard to say how much time you really have.
So isn't there like a guideline though as to when, for example, an alarm is supposed to be sent out before something goes off? So when somebody sees it on the weather control, for example, is there a guideline in terms of what the speed is as to when the alarm goes out?
So it is, but a lot of it, there's sometimes like a tornado watch or tornado warning. So a lot of times the difference between the watches and the warnings, and people have different settings. So sometimes people on their phones are like, I only want this or I only want that. A lot of times when you get it, when I say imminent, it's within like a couple minutes and you should be taking action.
Okay. Now, for most people, and I'm talking, I know I'm not alone, and in my neighborhood, we're not alone. There were a lot of other people who, in this last case, for example, literally went back to sleep and didn't do anything. So what would you say to those people?
I think it kind of goes what you said a few seconds ago. A lot of times when it doesn't affect people, then they really don't always think about it. And then you'll see a lot of preparedness actions will come, like right after a hurricane or after a snowstorm, where people see the devastation on TV and realize what could happen. The big key is like you should always be prepared and then take every alert seriously.
Now, when you talk about you should always be prepared, we're talking inside the house.
Yes.
Okay, so let's go through different scenarios. So we talked about the tornado. I think that's pretty clear, and it says like you go in the lowest room of the house and things like that.
Yes.
What happens, for example, if we have like a hurricane, like with Helene? What are you going to do?
So always listen to what your local officials will say, and they'll like. With Helene, they were saying certain areas had to evacuate by certain days, and so you should really listen because they're working with the local officials, the Weather Service. A lot of people are making decisions whether to evacuate, and then you should be able to, if you can, you should be able to evacuate and go to a safe place.
Okay, but I'm going to drill down on this a little bit because I want to be a little bit more specific, because we always say you should listen to your local management. That is too vague. So I think people really at this point need to know more specific advice in terms of what are we going to do?
Right. So the biggest thing is, I'll give an example. Like when they say evacuate, they'll say, you'll see, especially here in Virginia, there's things that say know your zone. And that's a lot of for the Hampton Roads, closer to the beach areas. So they'll say evacuation zone A or B. Here in Northern Virginia, because we're not really near a big body of water, Alexandria is, they have street flooding. And they'll say, hey, people need to worry about flash flooding here or there. But if the time to evacuate, you need to make sure that you have supplies. Right? People don't always think about that. You want to have a couple days worth of medicine. You want to have money. If you have children, maybe a couple games to keep them entertained. Right? You want to have clothes. So there's things that come with evacuation. Copies of important documents. If you don't, people are like, oh, I have everything saved on my computer. Well, if you don't take your computer with you, you might not have any of those important documents. So maybe a copy, or upload them to the cloud and be able to access them from your phone. So there's things that you should do to get ready to evacuate should the need ever arise.
That prerequisites that there is an evacuation and that you have power and that you have access to all these things, etc. Now, we've known, latest since North Carolina, that if the power goes out, then what?
You lose. And that's the biggest thing. If you have no power, then you have to be able to be self-sustainable for most recommendations will be self-sustainable for 72 hours. So that might be canned food or granola bars, protein, things that if you were at home with no power, things that you could sustain and still live for up to 72 hours. 72 hours is the recommended number. And we'll see people, I have emergency kits and I have all this canned goods. Well, then they have a power can opener and they can't open any of them. So you really have to stop and think about, if I have no power, what can I do? Go to the dollar store, get an old manual can opener and throw it in your emergency kit. Have copies of emergency papers. Have cash. Sometimes the credit card machines will be down, but gas stations could still be open and take cash. So have a little bit of emergency money and then put that in there.
Which brings me actually to the next point. Let's talk about what do we need to have. You touched a little bit on it. So are we supposed to have an at-home kit, a bag ready to go? Because as we've seen how fast weather developments can be, etc., wouldn't it be almost advisable at this point for everyone to have a go-to bag somewhere in the house?
Yes, I mean, I really recommend, whether it's in the house or the car. If we saw a few years ago, the storm that some people dubbed Snowgeddon or Snowpocalypse, and people were stuck on 95. And they were on the interstate for hours. So maybe if they had a go kit in their car with a couple bottles of water, some granola bars, at that time a jacket. Some people leave home and they only had on a suit or business attire to go from the house to the car. And now they're running out of gas, they have to turn the car off. So things that you want to be prepared. If you have to leave your car on the side of the road and walk, do you have proper shoes? Do you have, gloves, a scarf, hat? Not something that's dark clothing. Do you have something that could be a bright shirt? So I mean, that's something that you can have in your car. At home, you want to have food, water, and then you want to be able to check that every so often and rotate it. If you have something that's only good for a year because you like a certain type of granola bars, well, they recommend that you check your smoke detectors twice a year. When you check your smoke detectors, check your emergency kit. Some people like beef jerky or canned, Chef Boyardee or something that's just canned that they could eat. But you still need to check expiration dates. You need to make sure it's stuff that you like. If you have other family that lives with you, make sure that there's stuff in there that they like, because you really want to try to be self-sustainable for 72 hours.
But that does sound to me that we almost need to have a bag in the car, like a little emergency kit for emergencies, and you should probably have another go-to bag or so in the house, so you like split up.
Yes.
So you should have some water, some flashlights, some matches, I take it.
Yes.
What about batteries?
Yes, always take batteries, and the same thing with batteries. You want to check those every so often. We saw a while back that there was a rash of people trying to get rechargeable batteries, and they weren't lasting. So then when they needed to go use it, it wasn't there, or the batteries would corrode and not work. So there's things that you want to check. Go check and make sure you have flashlights. Make sure your flashlights are working. If we go back to, I'll say back when I was a child, I remember my dad used to always go and check, and we had a flashlight and a nightstand in every room, and then one in the kitchen and one by the front door. It's almost sometimes you just have to make sure that you have things and you know where they're at, and then check them every so often.
And my husband always said, never leave the gas tank empty.
Yes, that is it.
Because he said in case of an emergency, everyone's going to pile up on the gas station.
Yes, that is it. I think that's one of the biggest decisions we make as adults is, I'll just get gas tomorrow morning.
Yes.
And then you never know what's going to happen, and you could be out of gas or running low. So it's one of those things, once you get down to a half a tank, quarter tank, just go ahead and fill up.
Yeah, exactly. Cash is good. So you said 72 hours. So let me ask our viewers. So just so you remember, you got to have stuff ready for 3 days practically.
Yes.
Minimum. We're talking minimum, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what are we going to do in terms of flooding? So let's say you're in the house and the water is rising. What are we going to do?
So a lot of times if you know that flooding is going to happen, a lot of times people know where floods will happen. Like a lot of the same areas flood all the time. So if you live in a flooding area, you should know. FEMA has actually just released new flood maps, and many of the jurisdictions in Northern Virginia got copies. You can actually go online and look at that, and you can see if you're in a flood zone, a 100-year flood zone, 500-year flood zone. But also if you live in a flood zone, you should know that, and you should have been told, and then you have flood insurance. Or if you don't, you should probably get flood insurance. But that's things to know, so you kind of know if you're in that flooding area. And if you know rain's coming, go to a higher level in your house. Don't stay low. Go high, or have a way to go. Have a pre-plan. So if you're going to get 3 inches of rain over an hour and your house is going to flood, then maybe you should go somewhere safe until the rain is over.
So when you looked at the footage, though, for example, on Helene in North Carolina,
Yes.
some of the footage that we saw, the water was moving so unbelievably fast.
Yes.
And breaking through. So this is almost like a split-second thing.
Yes.
When something like this happens, what are you going to do? Are you getting out of the house?
Well, a lot of times if you saw that water, it's fast moving, and that water can move cars, it can move houses. Right. So a human's going to get taken away very, very quickly. So, and you'll see, when you see past natural disasters, you see people on the roof of their houses because it happens so quickly.
If they still have a roof.
Yes. And that's where it comes in. When that flooding was happening, they were saying, please evacuate, go to shelters, go to higher ground. That's when it comes into, you really have to listen to those local officials ahead of time and make sure that you're getting to a safe area. But if you're still home and that's happening, try to go to an upper area, try to call for help. Call 911 and let them know where you're at. A lot of times, if you stay in that area, you're then putting the first responders in danger because now they're trying to come save you. So that's really the notion of listen to their warnings, and if you're in that flood area and they say, go seek shelter or evacuate, please listen.
What about pets?
Pets are always, nobody ever wants to leave pets. They're part of our family.
Yeah.
So a lot of times it's, where can I go? A lot of times, can you go further inland? Can you go to another place that has a pet with a friend? Right now, many post-Katrina and post-Sandy, they came out, it was actually, I actually forgot what it was called. There's a new law, so you have to have a pet plan. So all localities have to have a pet plan. They have to have a pet shelter. They don't always open pet shelters, but if it's a huge natural disaster and they're starting to shelter people, then there's a way to shelter pets.
Okay, with this I have a question though with the pets also. Is it better to put them on a leash or is it better to have them off? And they both have pros and cons, obviously.
Yes. So if you're at home, it's kind of what's more comfortable. If you go somewhere else, you have to abide by the laws of where you're going. If you're in a hotel, in a public area, they have to be on a leash. If they're at home, there's very different schools of thought. Do we put them on a leash so we can see where they're at or where they're going and make sure that they're safe? But it's really what's comfortable. Some pets are not very comfortable. I know that my mom had a little dog, and he was much happier off the leash. When you put him on the leash, he thought he was going outside, so he always just ran to the door. And then, so if there was a natural disaster and there was an open window or a door, he might think it's time to go out, and now you just lost your pet. So you have to understand your pet and your situation.
So we were speaking about flooding. If something happens in your neighborhood, let's talk a little bit about neighborhood. So let's say that the power is out, there's something going on in the neighborhood, there's flooding, you see other people out there somewhere. What are you doing?
Help. I will always say help if you can. Neighbors helping neighbors is the grassroots of where we came from and where we're going. If we go back to the old days where everybody knew each other and you knew where every neighborhood in the kid was because that's where all the bicycles were in front of somebody's house. We've kind of lost that way of neighbors helping neighbors. So I will always say if you're in a neighborhood and you can help your neighbors.
Do you know, are there actually some neighborhoods out there that have sort of an organization or an emergency plan when something happens?
Yes, there's actually something called the Community Emergency Response Team, or CERT. And the CERT team around Northern Virginia is very big. Fairfax County, Arlington, Alexandria, they all have huge CERT teams. Fairfax County, they actually do it by neighborhood and zip code, and they have neighborhood captains. So a lot of times they'll go through and they can practice. They'll have scenarios. They learn how to shut off water, how to shut off natural gas, how to help people, maybe how to use chainsaws. So always look at CERT, and CERT is a basic training class. So even if you don't want to join your neighborhood team, you can go and take the CERT class and learn emergency preparedness and then how to help you and your neighbors.
So actually then this is open to any citizen, right?
Correct, yes.
So this would be really something that all of us should be doing.
Yes.
So can you look up where those classes are? So when you go to their website, can you see in your zip code, for example, where classes are that you can attend, or if you have a CERT team in place?
They do. If anybody in the Northern Virginia area, they all have CERT teams. Just look it up for your locality. I will tell you, Fairfax County and Fairfax City work together on a CERT team, and there's a joint zip code of 22030, and there's a zip code team, and they get together like once a month and they practice, and they go and work with the bigger CERT team, and they'll do search and rescue, they'll do traffic control, and they help at special events. So it's really a good class, and they teach you many things from first aid, CPR, emergency preparedness. They go over emergency kits, but it's a really good baseline education, and it's all about neighbors helping neighbors, and then you being able to help yourself and your family.
Neighbors helping neighbors, guys. This is really important, and I do believe that at this point, with so many changes in the weather, with so many changes that are still ahead, it would actually behoove a lot of people to go and attend to those classes. First of all, you also probably get to know a lot more people in your neighborhood, and then second, there's a lot of the panic functions away once you really know you're better prepared in terms of what to do when something does hit you, and then you're not kind of total blank like most of us. We're total blank when suddenly you're driving in a car or you hear the alarm go off, etc., and then you go, well, this is real suddenly, so now what am I supposed to do? So I think this would be a really, really good way to get better prepared, and then also for citizens, really get the ball rolling. Now, do they train in those neighborhoods? Are there neighborhoods where they have like sort of like a little test planning and emergency planning?
So they do, and they also do it. So if you take the CERT class and you want to stay on and join the CERT team, they have monthly meetings and they do quarterly drills. I know once a year they do a huge mock exercise so that you can actually go out and hone your skills. They go over like lifting or cribbing or how to move big items. So at least once a year they go and do big exercises. Some of the smaller ones, like by the zip codes, they'll go and do neighborhood exercises or like just get together so you can learn who some of your neighbors are and other skills they might have. Maybe somebody in your neighborhood is a doctor and they want to help, or somebody is a medical professional or an engineer of some sort. So I just think those little get-togethers really help, because then you know and you can practice and always refine. It's just like anything else, whether you're going to speak a foreign language or learn a skill. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Now, we live here in a very populated area. There are a lot of apartment buildings, condo buildings, etc. That's particularly difficult, I suppose, to sort of get this all working out. What is your experience with high-rise buildings, particularly in this area? Do they have fire drills and tests? And how serious are people really in prepping? I mean the residents, not the management.
I will actually say that people in high-rises are more prepared than the average person in a neighborhood or a household. A lot of times in the high-rises, you have to know where your exits are. If an elevator goes down, how do you get in and out of the building? If you lose power, what do you do? Are there emergency lights? Are there backups? How do I get out of the building? How do I get out of the car? So a lot of times, if you're just in a household, it's a couple rooms, a couple levels, and you don't really do that. But a lot of times in high-rises, people know that. And there's signs, because there's laws that we have to abide by. So there's exit signs, there's signs in elevators, there's signs on different levels. So a lot of times, some of that emergency information is kind of already there to help you.
Yeah, I think most people see that in the house. I'm just not sure how many really look at it.
Right. And I think same thing, when you go to a hotel, on the back of a hotel door, it always tells you where your room is and where the exits are. How many people ever look at that when they go in there? Not very many, but if we can teach one person to do that, and that one person can teach one person, and then it continues to grow, then we can always get that message out.
Now, What are we going to do about communication? So let's say the power is out. What's a great way to communicate?
I mean, when the power's out, we still have cell phones. Cell phones still work sometimes. If cell phones don't work, it depends on where you're at and what's happening. Like, you can always go other places or go to another area. A lot of times with cell phones now, you can put them on Wi-Fi calling. And if you lost power in your neighborhood, you can go to the local shopping center and get on Wi-Fi. Many coffee shops, libraries, a lot of places now have Wi-Fi. You can still go on Wi-Fi calling and then do that. Also, look at other ways to communicate.
That's what I want to get to. So what about little radios, little walkie-talkies or something like that?
So sometimes they can work, and they can. It also depends on what you're trying to communicate or who you're trying to communicate with. Nowadays, even with many power outages, we still see cell phones work. But the key is, how do you charge them if you have no power? So do you go to your car and plug it into the car to charge? Do you have a battery backup for your phone? Can you go somewhere else and plug it in? So those are the things that you kind of need to think about ahead of time, so you can actually have a plan of how to charge your phone if you do lose the power.
Now, if something happens in this area, would you advise people to have also have an idea in mind as to how to get out of the city, and what would be the best way to head out?
Oh, yes. I mean, I don't think it's just this area. I think that's anywhere you go. You should always know what your major roads are or your evacuation routes. Some places in Northern Virginia, they actually have signs on the road that say evacuation route, and then they'll know. But the key is you should do a little bit of research ahead of time. Know that. If you've seen the pictures recently from the Florida evacuations, a lot of times when there is evacuations, there's going to be traffic.
Yeah.
We have to know. Realistically, in this area, we practice evacuation every single day at rush hour. They just came out with this.
Okay, but that is scary, because when you see how that works in rush hour, that is not very comforting for anything, actually, because people have no idea how to move traffic.
No, and if there's really a big evacuation or something happens, that's almost what it's going to be like, because we're essentially moving millions of people every day in and out of Washington, D.C. or from the different suburbs. Many people don't live and work in the same area.
But that brings up another question. So then how do we get more disciplined drivers?
That's a great question. If I knew the answer to that one, I could probably start a whole new business. I think the key is now, there's technology. There's so much more. You see people texting and driving, reading newspapers, eating breakfast, putting on makeup. We have to get back to the days of where driving was just driving, and we can focus on that. But I think it's part of the effects that we live in now. We're multitasking. People are taking business calls. Post-COVID, everything was virtual, and time is money, and people are trying to work and do multitasking while they're still driving.
Yeah, which also brings up another issue we touched on a little bit, and this is because when we talked earlier, and you said you need to look up where the zoning is and what the areas that are hit, etc. I'm not so confident that people can function without phones literally telling them where they are, because I think most people cannot even read maps or street names, and even more so have lost completely a sense of orientation without the phone.
Right, yes.
So how can people prepare to live without the phone?
I think every now and then you just have to put your phones down, and whether that is you put a basket by the door and you put the phone down and you have family time, or you look for other things. That's one of the things we said in your emergency kit is think outside the box, like board games or cards. Because if you don't have your phone and you don't have power, what are you going to do? So many people are so reliant on their phones, they forgot just basic necessities and how to even talk or have conversations. There's times now where people will email each other in the same room, just because that's what we're so reliant upon. We're so reliant upon technology.
Yeah, I know. That's why I think this is the scary part in sort of preparing for emergencies, because when people get cut off of technology, then all hell is going to break loose.
Oh, yes. And I will say many of our cell providers right now have done such a great jobs with backups and and redundancy that we haven't lost a lot of cell towers during disasters. Even if we remember during the derecho a few years back, we were without cell towers for a little while, but they came back up very, very quickly. We're very reliant on them. We're very reliant on Wi-Fi. So I think the private sector is matching the need from the public to try to always make sure that we have connectivity, do the best that we can. We see in North Carolina that's not always the case, and you can be days or weeks without cell service, and it could be spotty. So you should plan to know your way, at least basic surface roads, without following your GPS. Know how to get to some certain areas. And maybe that's just a friend's house or the supermarket or just a common area. But there's people that go to they go to work every single day and they still put it in their GPS every single day to follow it. Sometimes you really have to just cut the cord sometimes and practice and understand what life could be like without technology for a few hours.
That I do want to actually pick up for our viewers particularly, because you just heard it. Yes, we're all so used to using the phones for everything. In fact, I've had, when I went and got a new iPhone, they didn't have it, they hadn't installed yet the phone and so on. So the lady seriously asked me, she said, are you going to be good to go back home without the service? And I was like, why? And she said, because you will be surprised at how many people do not find their way home without a GPS. Seriously. On this point, we really gotta, hang on. Oh, I'm gonna cut this out afterwards. At this point, we really, and I got just stuck here. Oh, hang on. Jesus Christ. There. There you go. At this point, we really gotta get used to basics one-on-one in terms of what are we gonna do during an emergency. You have to be able to function with literally the 4 directions, right? You have to be able to know where the sun's rising, where the sun's setting, so you can sort of get a basic feel. You have to be able to read maps, at least sort of directional if you need a plan. And we have to be able to function in terms of getting out. So trying to be without your phone for a day or two, boy, that would be a really, really great thing to do.
Yes.
I think that's really definitely one that we need to practice. Now, let's talk about where people can call. So let's say we have an emergency in the middle of the night. What is Fairfax City's? Do they have a hotline? They must have a hotline.
We do. You can always call the non-emergency number. Call the non-emergency number and they can tell you. We do have an information line that you can call for information, and you can always call the main number. In Fairfax City, we actually have what we call like an emergency hotline that we can stand up, and it works as a call center if something would rise to that level that we would need that.
Okay, which brings me to the next point, and this was the preparedness of the city of Fairfax. Walk us through how the city of Fairfax is prepared right now. Well, how do we envision that?
So I will say, first of all, the city of Fairfax is prepared because our residents can be prepared. We want to make sure that our residents are prepared, and then we try to help them the best that we can. And whether it's our residents, our businesses, or visitors to the city of Fairfax, one thing that we always do is Fairfax City alerts. You can sign up for alerts, you can sign up for emergency alerts. We send out weather notices, we send out emergencies. Any notices, we can send that out so that if you just get those notices, you can take some of those actions. And a lot of times when we send out alerts, we'll give you actions. So it could say, like this week coming up, we could have the first freeze of the year. So it might say we'll have the first freeze of the year, and that could just be an email. It might not make your cell phone go off, but it would be an email. We have the first freeze of the year, please prepare this. Or, if there's a big thunderstorm coming, it could, please make sure you check your outdoor furniture, secure loose items, things of that nature. So we really base some of our preparedness in the city about how prepared our residents, businesses, and visitors are.
Are there like regular citizen emergency planning hearings, for example, that citizens can attend so they know that there's sort of like a presentation of Fairfax or the city of Fairfax, so that people know, for example, what to do when and who to reach out to and so on?
Yeah, so just recently, September is National Preparedness Month, and every September we always do a really big preparedness fair. And we've done it at Sherwood Community Center the last couple of years. We have about 15 vendors that show up, and you can come and get information on anything. You can come and get information on household preparedness, pet preparedness, business preparedness. We have our sustainability out there. We have Fairfax County Health Department, Home Depot, Dominion Power. There's many of our partners that will come and teach you about all the different aspects of preparedness. So that's a really big one that you can come, and we team up with Fairfax County to do that. So whether you're in Fairfax City or Fairfax County, agencies from both jurisdictions are at the fair, and it's a really great way to connect with many of our residents.
And that's once a year?
We do it once a year, a lot of times, but then we go to other events. So we just recently had Fall Festival, and we have a table there to pass out information and answer questions. So we host the Preparedness Fair once a year, but then we go to many other events throughout the year to pass out information. We go to neighborhood associations, first night, we go to back to school nights at some of the schools. We send information home with the kids through our school system. So we find many ways to get the information out.
How would you classify, or how would you let citizens or residents know? Sometimes they are afraid of calling or so because they think maybe it's not enough an emergency or whatsoever. What classifies as an emergency?
Everybody has a different level of emergency, but I would say if you think it's an emergency, feel free to call. There's nothing worse than having an emergency and then not calling. So if you think that it's an emergency, you can always call, and then they can always tell you that it's not an emergency, or they can tell you how to follow up. If you're in Fairfax City, if you just want to email or inquire about something, there's something that's called Fairfax Resolve or Fairfax 311, and you can actually go in there and put in information. As a big drop down, you can put your address, so you can say, hey, I want to make sure I have more information on any of, I think it has 20, 30 or more drop down, so you can pick a subject, and those get routed to the various departments and information, and those folks can always email or follow back up with you the next day.
Now, safety obviously is an issue nowadays for citizens and residents when they move also.
Yes.
So how would you say to residents or people who are interested in moving into Fairfax, for example, how would I know if this is a city I can trust, that they are well prepared for emergencies? And how could I even evaluate that as a citizen?
So most places in Virginia post their emergency operations plan on their website. So go look at wherever you're at. If you're in Fairfax, just go to the internet and type in Fairfax Emergency Management or Fairfax County Emergency Management, Alexandria Emergency Management, any of them. And their emergency operations plan a lot of times is online, and you can see their plan. You can see, and their plan is their game book. What do they want to do when something happens? How will the city respond? What other departments are involved? And that gives you a really good look at it. If you go to Fairfax City's website, we have checklists, whether it's a hurricane, a summer thunderstorm, a snow event. There's checklists that you can download to help you. That kind of shows if people are taking time to do that, then they're really invested in your preparedness. If you look at Fairfax County, they have videos that they post, and they're very active on social media. So they're trying to meet their residents where they want their information. So I think when you look at things like that, it really shows how prepared they are, or how willing they are to work with you to make sure that you are prepared.
How can we increase the collaboration between citizens and residents and cities or towns or counties, for example, in that respect?
I would really say a lot of times your voice is able to be heard. I was in Fairfax City. We have something called Fairfax Engage, where we'll post information up there, and then we'll send it out, and we want the information back. So when we redid our emergency operations plan, we wanted feedback. We wanted community feedback. We were like, hey, does this work for you? Because really our response to a disaster is to help the people that we serve. So we want to know their thoughts and how they would engage with us, how we can engage with them. So we do community meetings to solicit that input.
But isn't that a little difficult to do if you haven't really experienced a real emergency?
It is, and part of that engagement is for us to also share that preparedness information. So we'll say if you've never been through a snowstorm, these are things to think about. If you've never been through a hurricane, these are things to think about. Every little chance that we have to share that information is one step closer to somebody else being prepared.
How do we make sure that we don't exaggerate? It feels very often that cities and communities, because safety has become, as I would call it, the new god in many ways, for people, not for me, but for some people. And how do we make sure that we don't overdo the safety stuff so you don't really lose trust and credibility with people, and still have people involved and feel good about being prepared? Right. What's that balance?
So I would say sometimes that balance is also, what is the official voice of the area that you're at and who's telling you the information? A lot of times I'll say it's overkill on information, because a lot of times it's many people sharing many different things, and sometimes they could be wrong. And if that information is wrong one time, then a lot of people will disconnect, or they'll just be like, oh, well, if you always say this and it's always wrong, why am I going to believe you? And it's that whole cry wolf scenario.
Yeah.
So definitely look at where the information's coming from. Now on social media, everybody thinks that they're a meteorologist. Everybody wants to give you their opinion on weather, but sometimes you have to go to that official source and then really look at that, and sometimes don't always focus on some of the other ones.
So people here in this area probably would say, well, anytime there's a snowstorm, with the first snowflake, things are shutting down in Fairfax. That does not exactly help building trust in emergency management, won't you think?
No, and I mean, you'll see people say snow, and then all of a sudden, all the shelves at the grocery store are gone. Right. Everybody's running to get toilet paper. Everybody's running to get milk and bread.
Yes.
I have no idea what people have been doing for toilet paper for the 8 days prior, but now all of a sudden somebody says snow and we have to go buy it in bulk. So I think some of that is just what's really going to happen. If it's snow and it's only going to be a dusting, you know, we don't need to panic. So I think so many times we just hear words or we hear things and it just instills panic, and it doesn't always need to do that.
Which brings the media's role in all of this, because I do believe a lot of the panic happens because networks have figured out that weather brings viewers. You get ratings through bad weather reports, so you get people to be glued on the screen, for example. How do you navigate, or is there a better way for citizens to actually siphon through the noise and look at what's really happened? What would you advise citizens or residents to do?
I would really say, I kind of go back to that, sign up for alerts for your local jurisdiction, or check your local jurisdiction's webpage or information. A lot of times now, when we look at, I'll just take our TV here in the National Capital Region, that TV can go all the way from Fredericksburg to Baltimore.
Exactly.
That is such a huge stretch. So the weather in Fredericksburg is going to be completely different than if you're living in St. Mary's County, Maryland. Or it could be very different if you're in Mount Vernon versus Prince William. And many people live and work in different areas, so that's why it's such a broad area that we cover on the media. But sometimes you just have to focus in on what's really going to happen in your area, not just the entire National Capital Region of Washington, D.C.
Then in terms of management, though, does it make, because I know in Fairfax County particularly, because it is such a big county, and because weather conditions can be very different in different ends, but yet we have so many organizations that just follow one sort of policy guideline for something like the snow, for example. Isn't there a better way to differentiate a little bit and not shut down the whole area versus just one?
So I will say, anytime that things are shut down, there's always thought and planning and proactive research that goes into that. So a lot of times people will look out their window and be like, we don't even have snow, or why are we shut down? Well, it could be ice. It could be many different things that we don't always see. Black ice could be a big one for snow, for example. Or if it's supposed to be precipitation, you know, before a certain hour and the temperature is below and it could freeze, the key is you want to keep people safe. So we don't want, if people are on the road, then we can't put the plows and the trucks on the road to treat or clear it to make sure that it's ready for later in that day or the next day.
Let's talk a little bit about the different responsibilities. So responsibilities for citizens and residents, and responsibilities for the city management, for example. What would you say, from your perspective, are really responsibilities for the citizens or the residents?
Well, I think part of that is they have to take responsibility for themselves and to be prepared. You always cannot rely on other organizations or the government or other people to help you. So that's what we say, like, you really should be able to be self-sustaining for 72 hours. And whether that's you're at home because we've had a big snowstorm and you can't get out, or, that means you have to take a little bit of proactiveness on yourself. Like, you need to make sure that you have medicines and not wait until you run out to get them. Make sure you have an emergency $100 bill or emergency, cash that's in your house, and not wait until, now the power's out and you're trying to find a bank or an ATM. So some of that is you have to take the onus to be prepared and be ready, and then understand what you can do for yourself to be able to help yourself.
Yeah, that's an important point. In terms of, I see one thing is quite critical, actually, and I think we haven't quite mastered how to navigate this. So you have, on the one hand, there is the self-sustaining and the self-responsibility for the citizen. On the other hand, we're supposed to follow 100% to whatever we're being told. Very often, that does not necessarily match up. How do we navigate that?
So I think part of that to navigate is, I would really say, what are you being told? And then what is the action that comes from that? So if they're saying, and I'll just take an example of, hey, there's bad weather coming, there's snow coming, please stay off the roads. And then you're like, okay, well, if I stay off the roads, then I can't go to work or I can't go grocery shopping. Well, understand what they're asking you. The more people that we put on the roads, it takes longer for the plows to get through. They really just want people safe. There's many people, especially in the medical profession, first responders, police, fire, or just people that have jobs where they have to go to work and they can't stay home. So you have to be able to take that into account. It's really just about safety, and then what is the most good for the most number of people.
Now, let's look at what responsibilities does the city have, for example, or a county or a town have. We talked about the responsibilities you would expect from the citizens. Now let's do the other way around.
Well, I think part of our responsibility is to make sure that people are prepared. We want to make sure that our responsibility is to inform you, to share communications, let you know what's happening. If it's a snowstorm, we have the responsibility to plow. If there's a massive disaster like they've had in North Carolina, you saw that they had comfort stations, waters, they had shelters, they had food. Their locality was taking care of that for many of their residents. So I think that's part of the responsibility is we're here to take care of people. We're here to help, but we can only do so much so quickly, and that's where being prepared kind of helps if on the personal side.
Now, we talked a little bit about citizens, neighbors helping neighbors. We spoke about how important it is to help each other. Now, we also have scenarios like we've seen in North Carolina, for example, where you have people from other states coming in helping people because either on the public side things are not going to get through fast enough, or simply sometimes because it's easier for some people to get into certain areas. So how can we better organize or collaborate in that respect between, let's say, willing citizens in other states that can help, and also not undermine any of the processes that are going on? So is there like a what's the sweet spot?
So I would definitely say, if you always want to help, there's many nonprofits that will always help with disasters. So you can look, it's called VOAD, Volunteer Organizations Active in Disasters. And they will take volunteers to come and help, whether that's at a shelter to cut trees down. There's other groups out there, Salvation Army, the Southern Baptist, Food for Others. So there's people that will always accept volunteers during disasters, and going to volunteer through another group is always better, because then you're actually an accounted for and you're an affiliated volunteer. Sometimes unaffiliated volunteers can make their response much more difficult because now we're having to account for what we were doing plus the unaffiliated volunteers.
Now, does emergency management in cities and towns have sort of like a resource list of, let's say, people with helicopters, with people with, where you can actually say we need to have something because we don't have it in our public supply, but someone else may have it. Is there such a resource list that cities can have, or that you personally know of that cities have that you can work off?
So we do. There's many things. We have mutual aid agreements. We have memorandums of understanding with other places. So the perfect example is, I'll take Richmond and Chesterfield, for example. They have a helicopter aquatic rescue team, and it's a joint venture, I believe, between Chesterfield Fire and like the National Guard. And they can put paramedics on helicopters to go and rescue people in floods. So that's a good team. And then we can know here, way back in 2010 when we had a huge snowstorm, we had the National Guard with Humvees that were here to help rescue people. So we have a lot of those abilities. Now with big storms, here in the Northern Virginia area, everybody has heard of the Fairfax County Urban Search and Rescue Team that goes all over the world to help people. That's a great FEMA asset that can go. And we have abilities. We have swift water teams that can go and help other people. And all of that can be done through the federal government. It can be done. It's something that's called EMAC, the Emergency Management Assistance Compact. That kind of goes state to state. Right now, there's many things helping North Carolina. There's teams all the way from California, Connecticut, everybody, and we can all work with each other to send help to where help is needed.
What was the worst emergency that you have encountered in your career? And it's been a long career, right?
Yes, I would say every emergency has something that's different about it. The emergencies that I think are worse is the ones that hit closer to home, or ones that might affect your family. A lot of times when disasters happen, you want to make sure that your family is okay so that you can mentally be at your job. When your job's to help people on their worst day, you need to make sure that you're prepared and your family's prepared so that you're not so much worried about them, but you can do your job. So I would say some of my worst disasters are just the ones that have affected my family and have pulled my attention away. I would say I've been fortunate enough, or had the honor, to go and help other localities when they've had disasters, whether it's been wildfires out west, snowstorms. I've been deployed to Florida for various hurricanes, and it's their worst day in their community, and we're able to go and help them. So it's really just an honor to go and do that. But the ones that hit closer to home, that affect your family, your community, the people that you know, always pull a little bit more emotional at your heartstrings.
Now, the one thing we hadn't talked about yet, now that you mentioned the fire, we haven't talked about fire yet. So how do we prepare at home, let's say, when there's a lightning or a tree falls into a house or something, or fire goes up? What do we do?
So the biggest thing is really have a plan. Right, so whenever we
but I don't have time at the time when the tree falls on my house to think about have a plan, or even if I had a plan, I won't have time to do it. What do I do?
Right, well, the biggest part about having a plan is, like, if you get out, where do you meet? Right, so part of that plan is talking ahead of time. So the plan could be, if something happens, we're going to meet at the neighbor's mailbox. And that way you can account for all of your family. Because if there is a fire, one of the first things when somebody calls 911 is everybody out of the house. If everybody's at that meeting point, you can say yes. Or you can say, 2 of us are out, we're missing so-and-so, they live in the basement. And then the fire department knows they need to go and look there or search there. Or if there's a tree in the house, they need to go and check that area. So when I say you have a plan, that really means talk ahead of time, practice. If you have young children, they need to know where that meeting spot is. They need to know how to get there. They need to be comfortable to do that on their own.
So it's not like you need to, what were we used to? I think we were always told, like, you got to go down on the floor or something like this, and then crawl out.
Yes. So they always say get low and then crawl below the smoke. Right. That was it. A lot of times, but now, they'll tell you to do that. You can get out, shut your door, put a towel at the bottom of your door, keep the smoke out. Go and hang something out the window so somebody knows that you're in the room. There's many different things that you can do, but there's also, if you're on the 30th floor of a high rise, You know, that's a whole lot different than if you're on a one-story Rambler.
Now, we spoke about natural disasters, we spoke about all sorts of things, but I think another scenario that we haven't talked about, which I don't know, may not be that inconceivable going forward, given the volatile times we're in, is also what are we going to do if there is, for example, an attack in this area? Are you guys actually even planning for these things? Are you preparing for these things? Or is this so far off our radar that we haven't really focused on it?
No, I don't think any of that. I don't think anything of that nature is off anybody's radar. Here in the National Capital Region, we always try to remain vigilant. At the end of the day, we have to remember the 9/11 attacks affected everybody in this region.
Right.
So that's always on the forefront of our mind. It's always in our planning. You know, there's various events that we have every single day to where we're always looking at that. We're thinking about it. Or, you know, all their plans, everybody's plans that we have are all hazards. So how we respond to anything, it doesn't matter whether it's a wildfire or a snowstorm or a terrorist attack. A lot of our plans are all hazard so that we can always respond to take care of everything.
So if we don't have access when something like this happens, and we don't have access to television, by the way, or something else, what is the first line of response that you as a citizen would take? Where could I go and verify information?
So one thing that I always recommend is have a contact outside of the local area and be able to call them. Because a lot of times, even if cell towers are busy, sometimes you have a better chance getting out of the area than you do here. Or, you know, way back when it was only landlines, you know, long distance might work different than local, but with cell phones, have a contact that's out of the area that everybody can call, check in, they can tell you. A lot of times, if anything happens now in this continuous 24-hour news cycle that we have, it's going to be on the television or media almost before it's anywhere else. It's going to be on social media before it's anything else. You have to vet the information, but sometimes having that contact outside of the area that everybody can call and say, I'm okay, I'm fine, and then they'll tell you what they're seeing on the media.
Yeah, and then last question. Ideal planning forward. Where you're sitting at where you're at today, so as the head of planning going forward, what would you wish we could accomplish for the next 3, 4, 5 years in terms of emergency planning? Where can we improve as city, as counties, as towns?
So what I would really say is just personal preparedness. The National Weather Service puts out something that's called storm spotters, and they'll teach you how to understand weather or how to call in and talk about weather, or even say, I have hail and it's this size. So it's a force multiplier, and we take that notion and then put it into preparedness. If we can get one person to be prepared, then that's one less person that has to rely on the government for help. That's one less person that will now not be able to help themselves. So if they can help themselves, they can help their neighbors, and people are more resilient. When something does happen, we're going to bounce back quicker. That's really the goal. Like, it's not a matter of when or if something's going to happen. It's a matter of, are we ready, and then can we bounce back for it? We know that it's going to happen at some point in time, but we want a more resilient community so that we can bounce back to normal as quick as we can.
All right. Thank you very much, Walter, for coming on. Thank you so much for watching. This was the episode for tonight. I hope you got a lot of insights and actually input, and actually also a checklist. We're going to prepare a checklist for you as well. You can also go to the Fairfax City website if you're in the city of Fairfax. It's really, really important that you get ready for it and have a plan. Talk to your children. Make sure you know what to do with your pets. Get the gas tank full and all these things. So a lot of things to consider, and the time to prepare is now. On this note, have a wonderful week. We see you next week. Have a good night.